Tensions erupted on Capitol Hill as a fiery exchange between Representative Jasmine Crockett of Texas and FBI Director Kash Patel laid bare a political and institutional crisis. What began as a standard oversight hearing quickly spiraled into a broader debate about law enforcement's credibility, its leadership, and the threats facing American democracy. Crockett's pointed criticism and Patel's unapologetic defense showcased two very different visions of how the FBI should operate. But beyond the theatrics, this clash reflects a deeper struggle over accountability, trust, and whether federal institutions can adapt in a time of polarized politics and escalating extremist threats. Today, we'll unpack the controversy, explain its origins, and analyze what's at stake for both the FBI and the country. Representative Jasmine Crockett did not mince words. She opened her remarks by declaring Patel the least qualified FBI director in the history of the Bureau. Her reasoning was simple, yet scathing. Patel had never served in the FBI prior to his appointment. While most directors have deep institutional backgrounds, Patel came from a political and intelligence track record, roles at the Department of Defense, National Security Council, and as a congressional staffer. Crockett's criticism tapped into a broader unease. Was Patel chosen for loyalty to Trump rather than professional law enforcement experience? Her sharp tone set the stage for an adversarial hearing, one that quickly expanded from personal qualifications to systemic failures.
Crockett accused Patel of targeting career officials for illegal firings even before he was confirmed. She suggested that the FBI, under his leadership, had been politicized in ways that undermined its credibility. What particularly stung was her claim that Trump-related cases were filtered through Patel, casting doubt on impartial enforcement of justice. For Crockett, the real issue wasn't just Patel's background. It was the perception that he prioritized political theater over public safety. She argued that ordinary Americans, particularly communities of color, felt less safe under his leadership, while white supremacists seemed emboldened. In her words, "I don't know who feels safe in this country except for the white supremacist." That stark framing cut to the heart of today's political anxieties. The exchange also highlighted a disturbing reality. Elected officials themselves are facing unprecedented threats. Crockett cited multiple cases of Republican lawmakers receiving death threats simply for opposing Jim Jordan's speakership bid. One representative even reported that his wife slept with a firearm after being terrorized by anonymous callers. By spotlighting these examples, Crockett reinforced her central argument that extremist violence is not theoretical, but immediate and bipartisan. The danger, she implied, is not that Patel is ignoring crime altogether, but that he is failing to confront the right-wing extremism that most directly threatens public officials, Black communities, and the democratic process itself. Her concern was blunt. The FBI, she said, was not inspiring confidence.
One of Crockett's sharpest points came when she questioned Patel's claim that the Bureau would need 14 years to become fully staffed. For a nation grappling with rising political violence, cybercrime, and foreign interference, that timeline sounded like an admission of failure. She also blasted Patel for redirecting resources to immigration enforcement, essentially making FBI agents perform ICE duties instead of focusing on domestic extremism. And in a particularly biting critique, she accused him of staging victory laps on arrests that were only possible because parents turned in their own child, not because of FBI investigative prowess. This mix of structural critique and personal attack gave her questioning a cutting edge that Patel could not ignore. Patel's response, however, was equally forceful. Dismissing Crockett's remarks as political theater, he insisted that results spoke louder than accusations. He cited what he described as historic achievements under Trump's expanded authorities, capturing more child predators, seizing more narcotics, and reducing the national murder rate to its lowest in recorded history. "I don't give a damn what they say about me as long as I'm succeeding in the mission," Patel declared. His framing was unapologetic. He positioned himself as a results-oriented outsider unfairly maligned by partisan critics. To his allies, this posture reinforced the idea that critics like Crockett were grandstanding. But to his opponents, it reeked of arrogance and dismissal of legitimate concerns. The back and forth between Crockett and Patel might appear like just another fiery moment in Washington, but the implications run deeper. At its core, this is about the politicization of federal law enforcement. The FBI has long walked a precarious line, accused by the left of targeting civil rights leaders in the past and accused by the right of undermining Trump in more recent years. Patel's appointment, controversial from the start, was emblematic of this tug of war. His defenders highlight his national security credentials and loyalty to Trump as strengths. His critics argue that such loyalty undermines independence, effectively transforming the FBI into a political weapon rather than a neutral arbiter of justice. To understand why this clash resonates so strongly, we need to revisit the FBI's history. Established in 1908, the Bureau has always been controversial, from J. Edgar Hoover's surveillance of activists to post-9/11 counterterrorism overreach. In recent decades, its credibility has been tested by high-profile cases, Clinton's emails, the Russia investigation, and January 6th. Each chapter added to the perception that the FBI was either overstepping or underperforming, depending on political perspective. Patel stepped into the storm, inheriting both institutional mistrust and unprecedented political polarization. Crockett's skepticism thus reflects not only her personal doubts about him, but also decades of accumulated suspicion toward the FBI as an institution.
Adding fuel to the fire, Patel's allies used the hearing to pivot toward the Durham report and its findings on the FBI's handling of the Trump-Russia investigation. Patel confirmed that declassified annexes revealed evidence suggesting the Obama administration sought to shield Hillary Clinton from scrutiny while discrediting Trump. Republicans framed this as proof that the FBI had been weaponized against conservatives. In their telling, Patel was not the problem, he was the solution, tasked with cleaning up a politicized bureau. Democrats, however, viewed this as deflection. Instead of addressing present-day threats like white supremacy and political violence, Republicans were relitigating 2016 to score partisan points. The competing narratives underscored how far apart the two sides remain. For viewers watching at home, this clash can feel both exhausting and familiar. On one hand, you have Democrats warning that the FBI is not doing enough to confront extremist violence that targets minorities and political leaders. On the other, Republicans insist that the FBI has historically been biased against them and that Patel's leadership is finally correcting the imbalance. The irony is that both sides claim the Bureau is politicized, yet they disagree on who is benefiting. The result is a vicious cycle. Public trust erodes further, extremist actors feel emboldened, and ordinary Americans lose confidence in whether federal law enforcement can truly protect them without fear or favor.
The question of resources also loomed large in the hearing. Crockett repeatedly emphasized that Patel was dismantling the FBI's strongest units, redirecting skilled agents away from counterterrorism to immigration enforcement tasks. This was more than just bureaucratic reshuffling. It signaled a shift in priorities at a time when threats from extremist groups were rising. Critics warned that weakening the FBI's domestic terrorism focus risked leaving communities vulnerable, especially historically targeted groups like Black churches and historically Black colleges and universities. The symbolism was stark. As white supremacist threats grew, the FBI appeared to look elsewhere. Crockett's outrage tapped into this fear, painting Patel as dangerously out of touch with the realities on the ground. Patel, for his part, insisted that critics were missing the bigger picture. He argued that his reforms empowered agents to act more aggressively against predators, drug traffickers, and violent criminals. By focusing on measurable results, he framed his leadership as pragmatic rather than ideological. Yet this defense raised its own questions. Were flashy statistics masking deeper institutional problems? Crockett suggested that Patel's emphasis on optics, celebrating arrests on social media or at press conferences, was designed less to reassure the public and more to please Trump. Her apprentice jab captured the suspicion, invoking Trump's reality TV background as a metaphor for Patel's alleged showmanship. The exchange highlighted a broader problem. In today's political climate, even crime-fighting data is filtered through partisan suspicion.
The broader backdrop here is the FBI's struggle to retain legitimacy in an age of fractured information. When Crockett accused Patel of ignoring white supremacy, she was pointing to a well-documented reality. Government assessments consistently show that right-wing extremism poses the most lethal domestic threat. From the Charleston church shooting to the January 6th insurrection, the pattern is clear.
Yet Republican leaders often resist framing white supremacist violence as the nation's top security priority, instead emphasizing threats from the left, from immigrants, or from foreign actors. Patel's refusal to directly embrace Crockett's framing fed her skepticism. To many Americans, especially communities historically victimized by such violence, silence on the issue reads as complicity. It's worth pausing here to note the irony. While Republicans accuse Democrats of politicizing law enforcement, Democrats argue that Republicans are the ones downplaying politically motivated violence. Both sides accuse the other of hypocrisy, and both can cite examples to bolster their case. This creates a paradox where the FBI, no matter what it does, is accused of bias. If it investigates far-right extremism, it is painted as partisan by conservatives. If it investigates Trump's opponents, it is accused of protecting Democrats. Patel's hearing crystallized this impossible position. Perhaps the only consistent takeaway is that the FBI, once imagined as a neutral guardian of justice, has become a mirror reflecting America's deep divisions.
For Crockett, however, the issue was less about abstractions and more about lived reality. As a Black woman in Congress, she reminded the hearing that she and her colleagues had faced credible death threats. These were not distant hypotheticals, they were personal experiences. The idea that Patel's FBI might take over a decade to fully staff itself while simultaneously reassigning key agents only heightened her distrust. Crockett's testimony wasn't just political theater, as critics charged, it was also an emotional appeal, rooted in fear that the government's top law enforcement agency could not or would not protect its own elected officials, much less ordinary Americans vulnerable to extremist violence. Republicans on the committee, meanwhile, went out of their way to defend Patel. They highlighted his resume as a former prosecutor, congressional investigator, and intelligence official, framing him as highly qualified despite his lack of FBI field experience. They praised his record of results, dismissing Democratic criticisms as audition tapes for cable news appearances. In their telling, Patel represented a new kind of leadership, an outsider unafraid to challenge entrenched bureaucracy. This outsider image played well with Trump's base, who view traditional institutions with suspicion, but it also reinforced the perception that Patel was chosen for political loyalty, a perception that remains toxic in a role meant to embody independence.
The tension between independence and loyalty lies at the heart of this controversy. The FBI director is expected to serve a 10-year term, precisely to insulate the role from partisan politics. Yet Patel's appointment shattered that expectation, coming as part of Trump's broader reshaping of the federal government. For supporters, this was a necessary disruption, a way to clear out the deep state and realign the Bureau with presidential priorities. For opponents, it was a dangerous politicization that undermined the FBI's credibility. Crockett's fiery critique and Patel's defiant response revealed how fragile this balance has become. What was once a matter of institutional tradition is now openly contested in the halls of Congress. Looking beyond the hearing itself, the stakes extend far beyond Patel's personal reputation. The FBI is the nation's premier law enforcement agency, tasked with countering terrorism, cybercrime, organized crime, and political corruption. Its credibility affects not just Washington insiders, but ordinary Americans' willingness to cooperate with investigations. If citizens, especially those from marginalized communities, believe the Bureau is biased or ineffective, cooperation erodes. That erosion makes it harder to prevent violence, harder to investigate threats, and harder to maintain public trust in democratic institutions. Crockett's fiery critique and Patel's defiant response revealed how fragile this balance has become. What was once a matter of institutional tradition is now openly contested in the halls of Congress. The language depends in part on how the Bureau navigates the next few years. Patel's assertion that the murder rate is at a historic low might be true on paper, but statistics don't always capture public sentiment. Fear, mistrust, and political violence shape people's lived experiences as much as crime data does. If members of Congress themselves feel unsafe, that perception ripples outward. If Black communities feel ignored when targeted by threats, that sense of abandonment deepens. And if partisan battles continue to dominate oversight hearings, then real solutions risk being lost in the noise. The FBI's challenge under Patel or any future director is to rebuild trust while confronting real,
documented threats.
The broader story here is not just about one hearing, one representative, or one FBI director. It is about the fragile state of American democracy in an era where trust in institutions is collapsing. Law enforcement agencies like the FBI stand at the center of that collapse, accused of bias from all sides, caught between competing political narratives, and tasked with defending the nation from rising threats. Crockett's confrontation with Patel crystallized those tensions in real time. It was messy, it was loud, and it was deeply revealing. Whether one sees it as courageous accountability or partisan theater, the exchange reflects the urgency of the questions Americans face about justice, safety, and democracy itself. In the end, hearings like this remind us that democracy is not neat. It is argumentative, passionate, and often uncomfortable. Representative Crockett's blistering critique and Director Patel's defiant defense were more than personal attacks. They were symbols of a nation wrestling with who gets to hold power and how that power is used. The stakes are enormous, from the safety of lawmakers to the integrity of elections, from the threat of extremist violence to the credibility of federal law enforcement. For now, the questions remain unsettled. But one truth is unavoidable. America's institutions can no longer rely on tradition alone. They must prove themselves worthy of trust every single day in the face of relentless scrutiny.